Welcome to the Cheating Confession Reddit channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a real-life cheating story. It will give you a better understanding of the issue of infidelity today and help you be more cautious when it comes to a cheating wife. Let's dive into this story together.
When I woke up that morning, the day appeared to begin as usual, with one small exception. Samantha, my wife, wasn't beside me. Typically, I'm the early riser since my job starts at 8 a.m., while her workday doesn't begin until 9:30. Following my routine, I got ready and headed downstairs to make coffee, as I do every morning. However, as I reached the bottom of the stairs, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. To my surprise, Samantha was already sitting at the kitchen table, fully dressed and seemingly prepared for her day. She smiled warmly as she greeted me, and we exchanged our usual morning pleasantries. While I poured myself a cup of coffee, she looked at me and said, "I have to leave for work early today. There's a meeting I can't miss. I'll be back around 5 and we can talk once you're home." Her words caught me off guard. Did I forget something? "What do we need to talk about?" I asked, puzzled. She waved her hand as though brushing off my concern. "It's nothing urgent. We'll talk later." With that, she rinsed her cup, kissed me briefly, and left before I could ask any more questions. Let me provide some background. My name is Grant Kaufman, and Samantha and I have been married for 41 years. We got married right out of high school at 18. Our story began long before that, though. We met in the 2nd grade, dated throughout high school, and always knew we were meant for each other. Neither of us had been with anyone else. We learned everything about love, life, and intimacy together. I've never kissed another woman except for polite pecks on the cheek, and I trust Samantha has been equally loyal. In our early years, we attended the same college, living in a small apartment and juggling part-time jobs to get by. Thanks to my GI Bill and support from her parents, we made it work, even starting our family during those college years. Our eldest, Terry, is now 37 and a family law attorney with 2 kids. Darcy, our second daughter, is 35 and works in Washington, D.C. for the Department of Agriculture. Finally, Sydney, our youngest at 34, is married to a police officer and is a dedicated stay-at-home mom raising 2 more grandchildren. We're incredibly proud of all 3. After college, I became a risk analyst for a large insurance company, while Samantha started teaching elementary school before moving into administrative roles. At 59, we're both in great health and lead active lives, though Samantha outshines me in that department. While I enjoy golf, swimming, and the gym, she's an avid distance runner and works out 5 days a week. She remains as striking as the day we married, often drawing attention wherever she goes, though she's always gracious about it. Our marriage has been built on a foundation of love and mutual respect. So when Samantha mentioned we needed to talk, I didn't feel dread or anxiety. We've always communicated openly, often holding family meetings to address everything from daily concerns to major decisions. Still, there was something in her tone that morning that stayed with me throughout the day. Eager to find out what was on her mind, I left work a little earlier than usual. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already in the garage, which was unusual. Inside, I found her at the kitchen table with a glass of wine in hand. A tumbler of my favorite scotch sat at my spot, waiting for me. Her fidgeting, her hand repeatedly rubbing her knee, instantly heightened my sense of unease. Before I could ask what was wrong, she said, "Sit down. We need to talk." Her voice was calm but low, and the seriousness in her eyes made my chest tighten. My thoughts raced, convinced she was about to reveal she was ill. But as she spoke, her words shocked me in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Grant," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need you to listen to everything I'm about to say without interrupting. Please promise me you won't get angry or turn this into a fight." I nodded slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. Taking a deep breath, she continued with deliberate precision. "You know I've loved you my entire life. Since grade school, it's always been you. There has never been anyone else for me." Her words felt heavy, each one sinking deeper into me. "I want us to grow old together," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I want to travel the world with you and spoil our great-grandchildren. But before we do that, there's something I need to do." My mind reeled as she went on. I've never had the chance to experience life with anyone else. I've never dated another man, and I need to know what that's like. Just for a short time. 6 months, maybe. After that, I'll come back, and we can continue the life we've built together. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, my breath grew shallow, and a sharp ache radiated through my arm. Samantha reached for my hand, her voice soft but unwavering. "Grant, this isn't about not loving you. I love you more than anything. But this is something I can't ignore any longer." I stared at her, stunned and heartbroken, as the weight of her words settled in. She had just unraveled everything I thought I knew about our life together, and I didn't know how to respond. I tried to speak, but my voice refused to cooperate. My mouth felt like an empty chasm, and then everything dissolved into darkness. Slowly, faint glimmers of light began to pierce the void, inching their way into my awareness. I struggled to open my eyes, but it felt as though they were sealed shut with an unbearable weight. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to force them open. Where was I? What were those steady mechanical beeping noises? Why was my body so unresponsive? My throat felt scorched and dry. And then it hit me. Who was I? The realization crept in slowly. This had to be a hospital. My mind raced with questions. What had brought me here? What had happened to me? And then, as if struck by lightning, fragments of memory began to surface. My name was Grant Kaufman, and I was in this hospital bed because my wife had tried to kill me. The thought was as staggering as it was incomprehensible. Why? What could drive her to such an act? My thoughts, sluggish and clouded, began to gather focus. Pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table. My wife had been talking. No, not merely talking, she had been making a declaration. She had told me, with chilling certainty, that she was going to kill me. The scene crystallized in my mind. It wasn't a conversation, it was a grim announcement. As the fog in my brain began to lift, I became aware of a presence beside me. A nurse was standing there, her warm smile oddly out of sync with my inner turmoil. "Welcome back, Mr. Kaufman," she said in a soothing tone. "I'm Nurse Smith. You're at Mercy Hospital. A few days ago, you had a severe heart attack, the kind we call a widowmaker. You're fortunate to have survived." Fortunate? I didn't feel remotely lucky. She glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's 3 a.m. The doctor will visit later this morning to discuss your condition in detail." I tried to respond, but my throat, raw and uncooperative, made even the slightest sound impossible. "Don't strain yourself," Nurse Smith advised gently. "You were on a ventilator. It'll take time for your throat to heal." Desperate to communicate, I motioned for a pen and paper. Understanding my intent, she handed me a notepad and pen. With trembling hands, I scrawled, "No visitors." Her expression shifted, her smile dimming. "Oh," she said hesitantly, "but you've had visitors. Your wife and daughters have been here regularly." I flinched at the mention of my wife, and she seemed to notice, quickly halting. I wrote again with greater insistence, "I don't want any visitors." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. I nodded firmly. My next note was blunt. "Do not share my medical information with anyone." Though her brows furrowed slightly in confusion, she nodded her agreement. Summoning my remaining strength, I scribbled another note asking if someone could help me set up a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. For a moment, Nurse Smith appeared taken aback, but she quickly composed herself. "Your condition isn't critical enough to warrant that," she began, but I interrupted by tapping insistently on the pad. Reluctantly, she said, "I'll inform the day staff," giving my shoulder a reassuring pat before leaving. Left alone with my thoughts, I tried to make sense of my decision. My life, as it stood, felt like it was already over. Why endure resuscitation only to continue living in this hollow existence? Perhaps the DNR would also convey something to my wife, a stark, undeniable message about the consequences of her actions. Sleep was elusive. I'd already spent enough time unconscious. Instead, I lay in silence, formulating a plan. My career as a risk analyst for an insurance company had trained me to identify threats and devise strategies. Now, I would apply those skills to unravel why my wife had declared her intent to kill me. Her words hadn't been a spontaneous outburst. They had come close to achieving their goal, my death. I needed time to decipher her motives, and by cutting off visitors and refusing to share information, I had gained just that. Reflecting on Samantha, I considered her personality. She wasn't someone prone to exaggeration. When she spoke, she meant what she said. Direct and determined, Samantha didn't make idle threats. She had claimed she'd been contemplating this for months. Had there been signs I had missed? Behavioral changes? Subtle warnings? No, Samantha wasn't impulsive. She was calculated and thorough. Once she set her mind to something, she pursued it relentlessly. This wasn't a fleeting whim or an empty threat. It was a deliberate, well-thought-out plan. I weighed my options. There were 4 possible courses of action. Let her explore other relationships and hope she'd return. Try to dissuade her from this path, though I doubted I could endure sharing her with others. Initiate divorce proceedings and end the marriage, or simply give up, die and escape it all. In my current state, the 4th option didn't seem entirely unappealing. At some point I must have dozed off because I awoke to sunlight streaming through the window. The clock read 10:40. A doctor entered shortly after, clipboard in hand. "You experienced a widowmaker heart attack," he explained. "This occurs when the left anterior descending artery becomes fully blocked. Survival rates are extremely low, but your wife's quick call to emergency services saved your life." He was the second person to call me lucky. I still didn't feel it. I asked whether intense stress could provoke such an attack. The doctor nodded. Severe emotional distress can be a trigger, though underlying factors like genetics and high cholesterol are usually the primary causes. Why do you ask? I described the events leading up to my collapse as clearly as I could manage. He seemed to understand. "That explains your requests for no visitors and a DNR," he said. "You'll need a calm environment to recover fully. We placed a stent instead of opting for bypass surgery, so your recovery should be somewhat shorter. However, I strongly recommend counseling. Emotional strain, combined with heart issues, significantly increases the risk of depression." With that, he departed. No farewell, no further guidance. I couldn't blame him. This was my battle to face, and I would have to navigate the aftermath alone. Physicians typically steer clear of developing personal ties with their patients. Their role often involves diagnosing, prescribing treatments, or conducting surgeries before moving swiftly to the next case. Not long after one such doctor left my room, a different physician, introducing herself as the hospitalist, entered to go over a daunting list of medications I'd be required to take for the foreseeable future. The sheer number of prescriptions felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. As I mulled over the situation, the notion of solution 4 inches grew increasingly tempting. Shortly after the hospitalist departed, a commotion erupted outside my room. My wife had attempted to visit me but was stopped by the staff. Frustrated and demanding answers about my condition, she was informed that I had explicitly requested she not be updated. Her protests escalated until security was summoned to escort her out. For the first time since she had confided her intentions to me, I felt a small surge of satisfaction. It was petty, I knew, but it felt like a minor triumph. Whether a sedative had been prescribed after the incident or sheer exhaustion took over, I drifted in and out of sleep for more than 24 hours. When I awoke in the dead of night, Nurse Smith was at my bedside. "Good to see you awake," she said with a warm smile. "Can you try speaking for me?" My voice emerged, raspy but functional, and the relief was palpable. She asked if we could talk, and I nodded, introducing myself as Grant. With a chuckle, she told me her name was Beth. She explained that she had been briefed on my situation and understood why I had imposed a strict no-visitors policy. However, she expressed concern about my DNR request. I reassured her that I didn't genuinely want to die and admitted that, at some point, I'd need to speak with my wife, just not until I felt stronger. Beth nodded sympathetically, but mentioned she'd already had to ask my wife and daughters to leave the ward earlier. She gently suggested that while avoiding my wife was understandable, I might consider speaking with my daughters. Her comment made me pause. How much did my daughters know about the events leading to my hospitalization? Given their closeness to their mother, it was possible they were aware of her plans. Samantha, my eldest, was especially tight-knit with her, even though she lived across the country in Washington, D.C., and they spoke almost daily. Perhaps Samantha had confided in her sisters. Regardless, I agreed with Beth's suggestion and decided to see my daughters, one at a time. I made it clear, however, that my wife was off-limits, and Beth respected my boundary. Within minutes, my daughters were just outside my room. Beth had only sent them to the waiting area. While I suspected she had orchestrated this, I welcomed the chance to see them. That night, I spoke to each of them individually, but avoided any mention of their mother. Instead, I focused on how much I loved them and how grateful I was to see them. The near loss of our connection brought tears to my eyes. Sydney hesitated before sharing that Samantha had taken responsibility for my heart attack, but had withheld details. I stayed silent, and Sydney seemed to interpret my lack of response as telling. She added that Samantha planned to elaborate on her feelings the following day. Meanwhile, Terry and Darcy informed me they'd arranged extended leaves from work to support my recovery. Overwhelmed by their care and the emotional weight of our conversation, I became too drained to continue. Beth stepped in to end the visit. After those heartfelt exchanges, I felt more certain about my future. No matter what transpired with Samantha, my life would continue. Complicated, perhaps, but not broken. Still, I wondered whether addressing the situation with my wife was worth the effort. Could our marriage endure even if she abandoned her plans? I thought my daughter's perspectives might offer clarity. If Samantha had shared her side of the story, their insights could shed light on what I should do. Infidelity doesn't just fracture a couple, it sends shock waves through the entire family. Interestingly, my wife and daughters had decided I would recover at home while Samantha stayed temporarily with Sydney's family. Terry and Darcy had volunteered to alternate caregiving duties. Although I was comfortable with the arrangement, I found it strange that Samantha made no effort to contact me during my first 2 weeks at home. Not a single text or call. I wondered whether my daughters had firmly instructed her to keep her distance, or if she was using this time to embrace her newfound freedom. Uncertain and unready for confrontation, I decided to speak with Darcy first. Her closeness to her mother might provide the answers I sought. When Darcy arrived, I got straight to the point. "Darcy, how long have you known about your mother's plans to date other men?" Her gaze dropped. "We've talked about it a little," she admitted. "How long, Darcy?" I pressed. 3 or 4 months, she finally confessed, her voice barely audible. A surge of anger welled up inside me, but I managed to rein it in. After a pause, I said, "I'm sorry for raising my voice. This has been incredibly difficult for me, and I value your thoughts." Her eyes softened with empathy. "Dad, Mom loves you so much. This isn't about you. She just feels like time is slipping away and wants to experience life differently." "Do you honestly believe that?" I asked, incredulous. "You think I should be okay with her seeing other men and then coming back to me as if nothing happened?" "Not as if nothing happened," she replied cautiously. "But if you love her, maybe you can forgive. She's devoted her whole life to this family." Her words struck like a blow. "So you're saying I should let her pursue younger men because I've slowed down?" "It's not that simple," Darcy murmured. "She just wants to feel desired again." Hearing this from my daughter was a bitter pill to swallow. Though I wasn't the man I once was, I had never imagined it would lead to such betrayal. Shouldn't love outweigh a craving for novelty? As I grappled with her words, one thing became clear. My relationship with Samantha might never recover. "Don't be absurd, Dad. It wouldn't count as betrayal if you were aware of it. That's why she tried to talk to you about it in the first place." Our conversation spiraled into a repetitive loop, stretching for what felt like an eternity. Darcy refused to budge on her stance, and I could feel the frustration building within me. Finally, I decided to cut things short before I said something I'd regret. In a soft, almost pleading voice, Darcy asked, "What are you going to do, Dad?" Letting out a deep sigh, I replied, "I honestly don't know, Darcy. But what I do know is that I can't live with the idea of your mother being with other men. It's something I just can't accept." I had little doubt that Samantha would learn about every word of this conversation before long. After a brief, somber hug and a farewell, I couldn't help but hope that Darcy would never find herself in a marriage like mine, or at least that she'd be transparent with any future partner about her beliefs. My next exchange, however, took a far sharper turn. Terry stormed into the room, her face red with fury. "I can't believe that woman is doing this to us!" she yelled. I raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Hold on," I said firmly. "That's your mother you're talking about, and this isn't about us. She's doing this to me." "Oh, come on, Dad," Terry shot back. "When someone in the family is unfaithful, it affects all of us. So yes, she's betraying the family." I paused, narrowing my eyes. "So you're saying she is betraying us? Not that she might be?" "Are you that oblivious?" Terry retorted, her voice rising. "She's been seeing other men since you were in the hospital, maybe even before your heart attack. I don't think it's gone physical yet, but she's definitely testing the waters." Her revelation stunned me. A mix of shock and sadness washed over me, leaving me to wonder how my relationship with Darcy would recover after this. Terry continued, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if she's even helping Samantha set up dates." Oddly, I didn't feel anger, just an overwhelming sadness. By that point, it was clear my marriage was over, and yet some part of me wasn't entirely shocked. Samantha had always been strong-willed. Still, I couldn't wrap my head around why she'd called for help during my heart attack if she truly felt this way. Perhaps in her own strange way, she still cared. I shook my head, doubting whether there was even a point in confronting her. Terry and I shifted to discussing the practicalities of divorce laws in our state. It seemed relatively straightforward. In a no-fault state, assets are typically divided evenly. Terry mentioned I could opt for a legal separation if I wasn't ready to finalize a divorce. I told her I'd consider it, though I doubted it would change much. She also pointed out that while Samantha couldn't prevent a divorce, she could certainly make it a prolonged and painful process. That thought gave me pause, and I decided to seek legal advice sooner rather than later. Terry promised to send me a list of recommended lawyers the next day. Later that evening, my conversation with Sydney was heartbreakingly different. She was inconsolable, crying uncontrollably as she begged me to let Samantha come home. I gently reminded her, "I didn't send your mother away. She's free to come back whenever she wants. This house is just as much hers as it is mine." Taking a deep breath, I asked her directly, "Sydney, has your mother been going on dates since my time in the hospital?" Although I already suspected the answer, I needed to hear it from her. Tears streamed down Sydney's face as she nodded silently. "How often?" I pressed. Through her sobs, she whispered, "Almost every night, Dad. I've tried to talk to her about it. I told her she was betraying you, but she keeps saying she isn't because nothing physical has happened. She says she told you about her plans." Shaking my head in disbelief, I realized how far things had unraveled. Before Sydney left, I called Samantha. Keeping my tone calm, I told her I was feeling better and that she could return home any time. I emphasized Sydney's emotional distress and urged her to come back soon. Before she could reply, I ended the call. I wasn't ready to hear what she might say. The following day, I meticulously prepared for our upcoming discussion. Sydney had mentioned that Samantha would be home at 1 p.m., so I spent the morning organizing my thoughts and notes. I've always believed preparation is critical in any confrontation. However, no amount of planning could have prepared me for what came next. When Samantha arrived, she didn't just walk in, she stormed through the door shouting, "Where are you?" Her eyes landed on me sitting at the table, notes carefully laid out. Without missing a beat, she launched into a tirade. "There will be no divorce," she declared, her voice filled with defiance. Samantha, a history teacher with a fervent passion for the Civil War, seemed to embody the unyielding spirit of Colonel Joshua Chamberlain at Little Round Top. In a burst of audacity, she charged forward with a ferocity that left me stunned. Before I knew it, I was lying on the bed, overwhelmed, as she passionately proclaimed that we loved each other and would always be together. My immediate thought was that she might finish what my heart attack had started. Hours later, as she dressed to leave, she announced she'd return the next day with her belongings. "We're moving forward together," she stated firmly. As she walked out, I said quietly, "Samantha, Thank you for calling the paramedics. She paused and turned, her expression a mix of affection and exasperation. I did it because I love you, you fool. Now rest up. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. Before she could leave, I added resolutely, one more thing. The first time you're intimate with someone else, our marriage ends. She smiled faintly and replied, that day will never come. In the months that followed, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Samantha continued going out once or twice a week, never explicitly calling them dates. She'd return late, sometimes slightly disheveled, but without any telltale signs of infidelity. We never revisited the topic of divorce, but the unspoken tension lingered like a shadow, unresolved, yet ever present. Each night followed the same script. She'd shower, climb into bed, and then initiate her relentless attempts to exhaust me with an unwavering intensity. I didn't resist. Part of me believed that if this was the way things ended, I could accept it. Deep down, I was convinced she hadn't been with anyone else before. I couldn't explain why, but I knew. Then, one night, she arrived home much later than usual. It was past 1 in the morning. I was awake, sitting in bed with a book, unable to sleep whenever she stayed out. It wasn't worry that kept me up, but a sense of anticipation, a certainty that something was brewing. The garage door's low hum announced her arrival, followed by the sound of her car parking. Moments later, her heels clicked sharply against the kitchen tiles, echoing through the quiet house. The staircase creaked beneath her steps. When she entered the bedroom, her gaze locked with mine. In that instant, an unspoken truth passed between us. She saw in my eyes that I knew. Without a word, she looked away and headed to the master bathroom. Her voice emerged from behind the closed door. This isn't about us. It means nothing and will be over in a few months. There's no need to discuss it. The firm click of the bathroom door punctuated her statement. As the water began to run, I left the room. I went to the guest room and barricaded the door with the dresser, not trusting the lock alone. There would be no repeating old mistakes. Yet I was certain she wouldn't follow. It wasn't in her nature. She likely believed that, given time, I'd move past my anger and things would return to normal. She was wrong. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, grieving the collapse of our marriage. Tears clouded my vision as I tried to map out the weeks ahead. Our interactions became robotic, polite but devoid of any real connection. We had become roommates, nothing more. I knew she continued her late nights, but I avoided dwelling on the details. I stayed in the guest room, often asleep by the time she returned. Unlike before, I genuinely slept. With a plan forming, I felt calmer, more resolved, and sure of my next steps. I didn't dwell on what I might have done differently, or blame myself for being an inadequate husband. I refused to carry guilt for emotions she had never expressed. To me, marriage was a sacred commitment, and it was she who broke that bond. She had never spoken of dissatisfaction, never sought solutions, and instead made a solitary choice that doomed us. Though I resented her betrayal, I understood the yearning for something beyond the familiar. It's a universal human desire, but she robbed us of any opportunity to face it together. Her unilateral decision left no room for dialogue. Even so, I grasped why she acted alone. Our marriage, like many, had subtly shifted to accommodate her needs over mine. If I was at fault, it was for being too accommodating. Yet nothing in our decades together hinted that I'd tolerate this kind of betrayal. Before we married, we had agreed on the importance of fidelity, setting clear expectations. There was no room for ambiguity. I had never even come close to breaching those vows, and I demanded the same of her. It wasn't my actions that destroyed us. It was hers. Several weeks after I first learned of her infidelity, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. One night as she went out, I sat at the kitchen table, the place where we had shared so many family conversations, waiting for her return. When she arrived, I spoke quietly. "Samantha, we need to talk." She waved me off dismissively. "Not now, I'm exhausted. Let's discuss this tomorrow." "No," I replied firmly. "We're talking now. Sit down." She exhaled sharply, clearly irritated, and dropped into the chair across from me. Her unease was apparent, perhaps because she still carried the scent of her lover. I no longer cared. I slid a manila envelope across the table and said evenly, "These are divorce papers. I've filed for irreconcilable differences." Her mouth opened to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No, just listen. A few months ago you asked me to hear you out without interruption. Now I'm asking the same." She leaned back, rolling her eyes and folding her arms defensively. "These documents explain everything," I continued. "My lawyer's contact information is inside. You have 3 days to sign and return them. If you don't, I'll have you served at work. I'd prefer to avoid embarrassing you, but I won't hesitate if necessary." Her face hardened with disdain. "Are you finished?" she asked. I nodded. "Good," she snapped, rising abruptly. "We're not getting divorced. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. Good night." The next morning, she tried a new tactic. She cooked breakfast for the first time in years, her demeanor disturbingly upbeat as she flitted around the kitchen. She invited me to sit with her, gesturing warmly, but I felt no connection to the scene unfolding before me. Instead of joining her, I walked to the door and said, "I'll eat elsewhere." She didn't realize I was heading to the apartment I had rented near my office. I wouldn't be returning to that house, except to gather my belongings once the divorce was final. As I started my car, I thought I heard her muttering under her breath. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. I was done talking. My future was already set. She never made any direct attempts to contact me, always using her lawyer as a middleman. I reciprocated, maintaining the same formality. When she refused to sign the divorce documents, I followed through with my plan to have her officially served at her workplace. Unsurprisingly, she enlisted her own attorney and began using every possible strategy to delay the proceedings. My appeals, and even those of our daughters, fell on deaf ears. Despite her best efforts to stall, she couldn't prevent the inevitable. Half a year later, we stood before a family court judge, each flanked by legal representation. I wasn't fully tuned into the courtroom dialogue. My focus was on enduring the ordeal. My attorney had reassured me this would be my only required appearance, which I found immensely comforting. However, my attention snapped into place when the judge addressed my wife directly. "Mrs. Kaufman, could you explain why you're opposing this divorce? The division of assets appears fair to me." Dressed as though she was attending a formal event, my wife stood up to speak. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "I made a terrible mistake that destroyed our 41-year marriage. At the time, I wasn't thinking clearly because I was dealing with menopause. It left me feeling unattractive and old." She elaborated on how attention from younger co-workers had boosted her ego, leading her to believe I would understand if she sought validation through a few so-called harmless affairs. "He knew about these relationships for months, so I thought he was okay with it," she confessed. "I see now how misguided I was." She claimed to have ended the affairs immediately after receiving the divorce papers and said she had been seeing a therapist regularly ever since. "My therapist has helped me realize the extent of my wrongdoings. While I understand I can't stop him if he's determined to divorce me, I'm asking the court to order us to try couples therapy. After all, a marriage that's lasted over 50 years deserves one last chance, doesn't it?" She concluded her speech with a glance in my direction, her expression carrying a trace of triumph. I was stunned. The sincerity in her voice seemed to have captivated the judge, and a wave of panic set in. Meanwhile, my attorney appeared unfazed, doodling absent-mindedly on his notepad. The judge then turned to me. "Mr. Kaufman," he said, "you've heard your wife's words. She's made a compelling argument. Don't you think your 50-year marriage deserves an opportunity for reconciliation?" Dread welled up inside me. This couldn't be happening. My wife's demeanor shifted, her barely contained excitement almost radiating from her. My lawyer continued his artistic pursuits, sketching what I realized was a screw on his notepad. In that moment, clarity hit me. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a fight, and the stakes were personal. "Your Honor," I said, standing, "may I take a moment to reflect on my wife's statement? It's a lot to process, and I'd like to discuss it privately with my attorney." The judge nodded approvingly. "Take your time," he said, seemingly optimistic about a reconciliation. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted as the possibility of rekindled love hung in the air. Leaning toward my lawyer, I whispered, "If I withdraw my divorce petition now, could the court still compel us to attend therapy?" My lawyer snapped to attention and replied, "No, they'd lose jurisdiction over the case." "And if I disappear entirely, could she still divorce me?" I asked. He explained that she'd need to serve me first, but if I couldn't be located, she could file for abandonment after a year. "One more question," I added. "There's no law requiring me to live with her, is there?" A glint of understanding appeared in his eyes. "No," he said. "You can live wherever you want. Will I still get paid?" "Absolutely," I assured him, standing tall and straightening my tie. Turning to the judge, I declared, "Your Honor, after hearing my wife's heartfelt statement, I've decided to withdraw my petition for divorce." The courtroom buzzed with energy, though most of the audience began heading for the exits, more interested in lunch than our drama. The judge, visibly moved, granted my request. My wife and her lawyer looked positively jubilant, tears streaming down their faces. With a broad, calculated smile, I left the courtroom. She followed me to the parking lot, enthusiastically describing the wonderful future she envisioned for us. I said nothing, simply getting into my car and driving away, leaving her bewildered in my wake. On my way to work, I tossed my phone into a nearby bush, symbolically cutting ties. At the office, I met with HR to arrange early access to my 401k savings, which I could access since I was over 59 and a half. Though Social Security was still a few years away, I calculated that my retirement funds and other assets would be enough to support me. Next, I went to the bank to finalize financial preparations, setting the stage for a strategic retreat rather than a drawn-out fight. The house, fully paid off and valued at close to $1 million, became a critical piece of the plan. I moved all our assets into my name, preparing to sign the house over to Samantha. Since my family only knew how to reach me through work or the now discarded phone, I had time to act without interference. 2 weeks later, with everything in place, I drove to what was now legally Samantha's home. I arrived in a shiny new 38-foot motorhome, towing a Jeep Wrangler. When I knocked on the door, Samantha opened it, flanked by our 3 daughters. They eyed the motorhome, quickly piecing together my intentions. "Honey, you're home!" Samantha exclaimed. "We were so worried about you!" Our daughters, silent but watchful, already seemed to grasp the full picture. "Sweetheart," I began, "I just stopped by to say goodbye." "Goodbye?" she repeated, her voice tinged with confusion. "But we're meant to be together. Isn't that what you want?" "I just need some time away," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "I've retired, Samantha. I plan to travel the country." She blinked, still not comprehending. "But I can't just leave right now. I have work, and school is in session. This was supposed to be our dream together." Our daughters remained silent, though their stunned expressions spoke volumes. Smiling warmly, I wished them all the best and climbed into the motorhome. Samantha stood frozen in the driveway, watching as I drove off to begin a new chapter of my life. Their eyes pierced me, filled with an unspoken disapproval that weighed heavily in the air. They already understood that I was about to abandon them to face the emotional tempest that was my wife, and the tension in their expressions was unmistakable. "Samantha," I said, breaking the oppressive silence, "we need to step inside and talk. There are things I need to say, and I'll make sure you have your chance to speak as well." We moved into the kitchen, taking our places around the familiar table that had been a witness to so many pivotal family conversations. The gravity of the moment pressed on me, knowing this would be our last meeting in this way. The thought was almost too much to bear, but in the weeks leading to this day, I had delved deeply into my thoughts and emotions. My anger had faded, replaced by an unexpected serenity. Anxiety and uncertainty had given way to an unusual sense of resolution. I had finally reached a place of peace, and with that clarity, I began. "First of all," I started, "I need to apologize, to you, Samantha, and to our daughters, for the way I acted when you told me about your decision to pursue relationships with other men. My behavior was wrong, particularly at the hospital." Samantha parted her lips as if to respond, but I lifted a hand to gently halt her. Please, let me finish. I've come to understand that you didn't cause my heart attack. Oddly enough, you may have even saved my life. The heart attack was bound to happen, but because of your quick actions, I'm here today. The doctors assured me of that. So, thank you." Her face registered shock, leaving her momentarily speechless. I pressed on. "Since the court hearing, I've had ample time to reflect and came to an important realization. Samantha, neither of us has ever truly experienced life on our own. We've been together since we were kids. I think I've finally grasped what you meant when you told me your plans. At the time, I was consumed by the physical implications, but now I see it was about more than that. You wanted independence, a chance to take control of your life. In a way, I feel the same. We've always made decisions as a unit, but now I need to figure out who I am apart from us. It's time for both of us to explore life independently." I paused, giving her room to respond, knowing she wouldn't hold back. Her words erupted like a dam breaking. "But I don't want to be alone. I'll never agree to a divorce. I want us to stay together forever. I made a terrible mistake saying those things to you." Tears streaked down her face as she struggled to get the words out. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do anything. Please don't leave me." Her sobs became so intense that her breathing grew labored, and our daughters, though softly crying, remained silent observers of the unfolding scene. "Samantha," I said gently, "I understand that you won't consent to a divorce, and truthfully, I no longer want one. But I can't continue living in this house. I need to take this time to discover who I am as an individual." I slid a document across the table toward her. "This is the quitclaim deed for the house. It's yours now. I've already divided our assets equally." The girls began to weep openly as the weight of my words set in. "Grant, don't do this," Samantha begged. "I'll change, I swear. I've been seeing a therapist, and she's helped me understand how wrong I was. I haven't been with anyone for months. I'll prove to you that I'm different. Just stay." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her arms on the table, overcome by emotion. "Samantha," I said softly, "I've already forgiven you. Maybe one day I'll return, but right now I need to let you go. I want you to live your life without guilt or obligation to me, but I can't stay here and watch you do it." Her cries intensified, and through her tears she pleaded, "How will I reach you? You can't just vanish. That isn't fair." Turning to my daughters, I addressed them with a heart weighed down by sorrow. "I'm so sorry it has to be like this. I'll always love you both. Please take care of your mother. If you ever need me, you can email me. I won't have a phone or a permanent address because I plan to keep moving for a while." By this point, all three of them were inconsolable. I rose from the table, my legs heavy as if bound by chains, and walked out of the door without looking back. Climbing into my motorhome, I turned the key, started the engine, and drove away, heading into a future that, for the first time, was mine alone. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.